The large house woke before the sun. Lights turned on one by one, not because the owner was awake, but because the workers were. In the quiet halls, footsteps moved softly across polished floors. A young maid started her day the same way she always did. Long before anyone important appeared, she tied her hair back, put on her plain uniform, and took a deep breath before stepping into another long day of work. She had worked in the mansion for almost 2 years. To most people, she was just another helper, someone who cleaned rooms, served drinks, and stayed out of sight. Her name was rarely spoken. When it was, it came with a sharp tone or a quick command. She learned early that the safest way to survive here was to be quiet and invisible. The house itself was grand, almost cold in its beauty. Tall ceilings, wide windows, expensive art on the walls. Everything looked perfect, but nothing felt warm. The maid often thought the place felt more like a museum than a home. Nothing was touched unless it had to be. Nothing was allowed to feel human. The owner of the house was known as a successful businessman. People spoke of him with respect and fear. He had built his wealth through sharp deals and strong control. He liked order. He liked power. He did not like mistakes. Those who worked for him knew this well. A wrong step could lead to public scolding or sudden dismissal. The maid knew his rules by heart. Never speak unless spoken to. Never look guests in the eye. Never touch anything personal. She followed these rules carefully. She needed the job. Without it, she had nowhere else to go. Her life before this house had not been easy. She had grown up in a small place where dreams were simple and often delayed. Her family struggled, and responsibility came early. There were moments from her past she carried quietly, memories she kept hidden deep inside. Among those memories was something she never spoke about here. Music. There was a time when music filled her days, when her hands did more than scrub floors and polish silver. But that time felt far away now, like another life. She rarely allowed herself to think about it, because thinking led to pain, and pain led to weakness. So she focused on work. That morning, the mansion was busier than usual. A special event was planned for the evening. Important guests were coming. The staff moved faster, voices tense with pressure. Every surface had to shine. Every detail had to be perfect. The maid was assigned to the main hall. It was the largest space in the house, where guests would gather before dinner. In the center of the hall stood a grand piano. It was black and glossy, untouched most days. It was more decoration than instrument. The owner liked the idea of culture, even if he rarely engaged with it. As she cleaned nearby tables, the maid tried not to look at the piano, but her eyes betrayed her. For a brief moment, her gaze rested on the keys, white and black, simple and familiar. Her fingers twitched without her noticing. She quickly looked away. It was dangerous to linger. Cameras watched every corner. Supervisors noticed everything. She reminded herself where she was still. Something about the quiet hall and the waiting piano stirred something inside her. Not hope, but memory. The way sound once felt like air filling her chest. The way music once made her feel seen. Footsteps echoed suddenly. She stiffened. The owner entered the hall, speaking loudly on his phone. His voice filled the space, sharp and confident. He walked with purpose, barely noticing the staff around him. To him, they were part of the furniture. The maid lowered her head and stepped back. He ended the call and looked around the hall, his eyes scanning the room. He noticed a small detail out of place. A glass not aligned. His mood shifted instantly. He pointed. A short command. The maid rushed forward to fix it. She apologized softly, even though it was not her mistake. He barely acknowledged her words. His attention moved on, already searching for the next flaw. As he turned, his eyes paused on the piano. He smirked slightly, an idea forming. He enjoyed moments like this, moments where he could remind people of their place. He noticed the maid again. Still nearby, she felt his gaze and froze. For a second, nothing happened. Then he spoke, his voice carrying across the hall. He made a casual remark about the piano, about culture, about talent. It sounded harmless on the surface, but there was a sharp edge beneath it. Some staff members exchanged nervous looks. The maid did not respond. She kept her eyes down, hoping he would lose interest. But he did not. He asked her a question. Simple words, direct, loud enough for others to hear. Her heart began to race. She answered quietly, choosing her words carefully. She said she was just cleaning. He laughed lightly, not with humor, but with control. He took a step closer, studying her like an object. He noticed her hands, rough from work, but steady. Something about that steadiness annoyed him. He made another comment, louder this time. drawing attention from nearby staff. There was amusement in his tone, the kind that comes from power, not kindness. The maid felt heat rise to her face. She wished the floor would open and swallow her. She did not yet know that this small moment would grow into something much larger. For now, she only knew fear and confusion. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, turning away as if bored. The moment passed, but the tension did not. The maid stepped back, her chest tight. She told herself to focus, to breathe, to finish her work. As she continued cleaning, her thoughts raced. She replayed the exchange in her mind, trying to understand why it felt different from all the other times she had been spoken down to. The piano remained in her vision, impossible to ignore now. She remembered a smaller room from long ago, a worn piano, a cracked bench, long nights of practice, calloused fingers, encouraging words from someone who once believed in her. She shook her head, forcing the memories away. That life was gone. The day moved on. The mansion filled with sound and movement as preparations continued. The maid blended back into the background, as she always did, but something had shifted. She did not know it yet, but the quiet balance of her life had begun to crack. The event that night would not be just another dinner. The piano would not stay silent, and the power in that house would soon be tested in a way no one expected. For now, she kept working, unaware that her invisible life was about to be dragged into the light. The evening arrived faster than expected. By the time the sun began to set, the mansion no longer felt quiet or empty. Expensive cars filled the long driveway, and well-dressed guests stepped inside with confident smiles. Laughter echoed through the halls, mixing with the sound of glasses clinking and shoes tapping on marble floors. The maid stood near the back entrance, holding a tray with drinks. Her posture was straight, her face calm, but inside she felt uneasy. The brief moment from the morning kept replaying in her mind. The look the owner had given her, the tone of his voice. It had felt like a warning, even though nothing had happened yet. She told herself she was imagining things. Tonight was about the guests, not her. The staff moved like a practiced machine. Each person knew their place. Mistakes were not allowed, especially with so many important people watching. The maid followed every rule carefully, stepping lightly, speaking softly, making herself small. As guests gathered in the main hall, conversations grew louder. They spoke about money, deals, trips, and achievements. Their words floated past her as she served drinks, but none of them were meant for her. She was present, yet unseen. The piano stood in the center of the hall, shining under soft lights. Someone mentioned it in passing, praising its beauty. Another guest joked that it was probably never played. Laughter followed. The maid felt a small ache in her chest. She avoided looking at it. The owner moved among his guests with confidence, smiling and shaking hands. He was in his element now. This was his world. People admired him here. They listened when he spoke out. As the evening continued, the maid noticed his attention slowly drifting back toward her side of the room. Each time she felt his eyes on her, her stomach tightened. She kept her focus on her work, hoping the feeling would pass. At one point, she was asked to refill glasses near the piano. Her steps slowed without her meaning to. The air felt heavier there, like the space was holding its breath. She placed the tray down carefully and poured drinks, her hand steady despite the tension running through her. That was when it happened. The owner raised his voice slightly, enough for nearby guests to hear. He made a comment about entertainment, about how a gathering like this deserved something special. His tone was light, playful, but his eyes were sharp. Guests turned their attention toward him. He gestured toward the piano. Someone laughed and said it would be nice to hear music. The owner smiled, then glanced directly at the maid. He spoke again, louder now. He suggested that since they had staff around, perhaps someone could provide a little performance. His words sounded like a joke, but the way he looked at her made his intention clear. The room quieted slightly. The maid felt her throat go dry. He called her closer. Her feet felt heavy as she stepped forward. Every instinct told her this was wrong, but she had no choice. Refusing him was not an option. Everyone was watching now. He asked her, in front of the guests, if she knew how to play. The question hit her like a sudden wave. For a brief second, she considered lying. Saying no would end it, but something stopped her. Maybe it was pride, maybe fear, maybe the simple truth pressing against her chest. She answered honestly, her voice barely above a whisper. A few guests reacted with surprise. Others smiled in amusement. Someone made a quiet comment. Not unkind, but not respectful either. The owner raised an eyebrow. He asked another question. This time with a hint of challenge, he suggested she prove it. Her heart began to pound. She tried to explain that she was working, that she did not want to interrupt the evening. Her words came out nervous, broken. He cut her off with a wave of his hand. He told her not to be shy. He said everyone would enjoy it. He made it sound like a favor, like an opportunity. The guests watched closely now. Some leaned forward, others exchanged knowing looks. The maid felt trapped. She looked at the piano. It seemed closer than before, larger, almost alive. Memories pushed forward again, stronger this time. Lessons, long hours, the feel of keys beneath her fingers. She swallowed hard, with no other option. She moved toward the piano. Each step felt like a walk toward judgment. As she reached the bench, the room fell quiet. Even the soft music that had been playing earlier was turned off. All eyes were on her. She sat down slowly. Her hands hovered above the keys. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. If she failed, it would confirm every unspoken thought in the room. If she succeeded, she did not know what would happen. The owner stood nearby, watching with interest, a faint smile on his face. She took a breath. Her fingers touched the keys. For a second, nothing happened. Then she began. The first notes were soft, almost uncertain. A few guests shifted in their seats, expecting something simple, maybe even awkward. But as the melody continued, something changed. The sound grew clearer, stronger. The music flowed smoothly, filling the hall with warmth that had been missing from the cold walls. Conversation stopped completely. People looked up, surprised. The maid forgot where she was. She forgot the eyes watching her, the fear, the power around her. For those moments, there was only the music. Her hands moved with memory and instinct, guided by something deeper than thought. The piano was no longer an object. It was a voice. Guests began to listen in silence. The owner's smile slowly faded. No one laughed now. As the music continued, emotions surfaced in the room. Some guests leaned back, eyes closed. Others stared at her hands in disbelief. The maid played not to impress, but because she could not stop. The music carried pieces of her life, her struggles, her hope. When the final note faded, the silence that followed was heavy and real. No one spoke. The maid remained still, her hands resting on the keys, her breath shallow. She slowly became aware of where she was again. She looked up, faces stared back at her, changed. The owner stood frozen, his expression unreadable. The moment stretched on, fragile and tense. The maid stood up quietly, unsure of what she had just done. She waited for a command, for anger, for laughter. But none came. The room remained silent, as if everyone was still trying to understand what they had witnessed. Something had shifted, and nothing in that mansion would feel the same again. The silence did not break right away. It hung in the air, thick and heavy, as if the room itself needed time to breathe. The maid stood beside the piano, her hands still slightly shaking. She felt exposed, like she had stepped into a light she was never meant to stand under. Then a single sound cut through the quiet. Someone began to clap slowly. Another joined, then another. Within seconds, the room filled with applause. It was not loud at first. It grew carefully, almost unsure, but it was real. The kind of applause that comes from surprise, not politeness. The maid flinched at the noise. She was not used to attention like this. She lowered her head, unsure if she should bow, leave, or simply disappear. The owner raised his hand slightly. The applause faded. The sudden quiet made her heart sink again. She prepared herself for what might come next. A sharp comment, a reminder of her place. He looked at her for a long moment. His face showed none of the humor from earlier. Instead, there was something else there, confusion, perhaps even discomfort. He spoke calmly, asking where she had learned to play like that. The question felt unreal. The maid hesitated. Her first instinct was to say very little. Personal stories were not welcome in this house. Still, she answered softly. She said she learned long ago. She did not go into details. Some guests murmured among themselves. One asked why someone with such talent was working as a maid. The question made her chest tighten. She did not answer right away, not because she was rude, but because the truth was complicated. Life did not always move in straight lines. Talent did not protect people from loss or hardship. Before she could speak, the owner stepped in. He laughed lightly and brushed the comment aside. He said people ended up where they belonged. The words stung. The maid felt the warmth from the applause fade. She reminded herself again that this was not her world. This moment, no matter how powerful, did not change who held control. The owner thanked her in a formal way, as if closing a performance. He told her she could return to her duties. She nodded and stepped away from the piano. As she walked back toward the edge of the room, she felt eyes following her. Not mocking eyes this time, curious ones, respectful ones. It made her uncomfortable in a new way. She picked up a tray and continued serving, her movements automatic. Inside, her thoughts were loud and scattered. What had she done? The evening continued, but the mood had shifted. Conversations resumed, yet they sounded different now. Guests spoke in softer tones. Some glanced toward the piano again, as if expecting it to speak once more. A few guests tried to speak to the maid as she passed by. Simple comments, compliments. She responded politely but briefly, careful not to overstep. The owner watched from a distance. He told himself the moment meant nothing, just a party trick. Still, something about it bothered him. He did not like surprises. He did not like being challenged in his own house. Later, as dinner was announced, the staff moved quickly to guide guests toward the dining area. The maid worked beside others, her face calm again, her voice quiet. One of the older staff members leaned close and whispered that she had done well. It was the first kind word she had heard in that house in a long time. She almost cried. During dinner, she stayed mostly in the background, but the memory of the music lingered in the room. Guests mentioned it between courses. Some asked the owner if he planned to host live music more often. He smiled tightly and changed the subject. Inside, irritation grew. After the guests finished eating, some returned to the main hall for drinks. The piano stood waiting again, silent. One guest, emboldened by wine, asked if the maid could play another piece. The owner's smile vanished for a second. He said the staff was busy. The maid felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. As the night wore on, the guests slowly began to leave. Goodbyes were exchanged. Compliments were given. The house grew quieter. When the last car pulled away, the staff began cleaning. The maid worked as she always did, wiping tables, gathering glasses, restoring order. The piano remained untouched. Near midnight, she was called into a smaller room off the main hall. Her stomach dropped. The owner stood there. Alone, he gestured for her to step inside and closed the door behind her. The room felt smaller than before. He told her to sit. She obeyed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he asked again about her past. This time his tone was different, less mocking, more direct. She chose her words carefully. She spoke about lessons when she was younger, about a teacher who believed in her, about how life changed after illness and loss, about needing work more than dreams. She did not complain. She did not blame anyone. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned back and studied her. He said talent was wasted when hidden. She did not argue. He told her she had embarrassed him earlier, even if she did not mean to. The words surprised her. He explained that he had expected her to fail, that her success had made him look foolish in front of his guests. The honesty shocked her more than anger would have. She apologized quietly, though she was not sure why. He waved it away and stood up. He said the situation was not over. Those words stayed with her as she returned to her room later that night. She lay awake on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. Her hands still remembered the piano. Her heart was full of questions. She did not know if the music had opened a door or created a new danger. All she knew was that her invisible life had changed, and there was no going back to the way things were before. The next morning arrived quietly, but nothing felt normal anymore. The maid woke before her alarm, her mind already racing. The events of the night before replayed again and again. The sound of applause, the owner's face, the strange conversation in the small room. She got dressed and stepped into the hallway, expecting the usual cold routine. But something had changed. People looked at her differently, not openly, not boldly, but enough for her to notice. A few staff members nodded at her. One even smiled. It made her uneasy. She preferred being invisible. Being noticed came with risk. She went about her duties as usual, cleaning rooms, organizing supplies, staying quiet. Still, the feeling followed her, like a shadow she could not shake. By late morning, she was called to the main office. Her hands felt cold as she stood outside the door. Being summoned like this was never a good sign. She took a breath and knocked. The owner told her to come in. The office was large and neat. Everything had its place. He stood by the window, his back to her, looking out at the grounds. He did not turn right away. Finally, he spoke. He said the guests were still talking about the performance. He said some had called him afterward, asking questions about her. She stayed silent. He turned and looked at her. His expression was serious, but not angry. He said people like stories. He said talent makes people curious, and curiosity can be useful. She did not understand what he meant. He explained that he planned to host more gatherings, bigger ones, events with press and important connections. He said live music would add value. Her heart began to beat faster. He asked if she would be willing to play again. The words felt unreal. She hesitated. Playing again meant standing in the light once more. It meant more eyes, more judgment. She said she was just a maid. He replied that she could be both. The idea frightened her. She asked if this meant her duties would change. He said not yet. That answer troubled her. He dismissed her with a short nod. She left the office, with her thoughts spinning. The rest of the day passed slowly. She cleaned, served, and listened. Whispers followed her through the halls. Some staff members spoke kindly. Others kept their distance. Not everyone was happy. One supervisor made sharp comments, reminding her not to forget her place. Another warned her not to get ideas. She absorbed it all quietly. That afternoon, she found herself alone in the main hall. The piano stood there, polished and waiting. For a long moment, she just looked at it. She sat down slowly. She did not play. Instead, she rested her hands on her lap and stared at the keys. Fear and longing twisted together inside her. She wondered if she had made a mistake by telling the truth. Later that evening, preparations began for another small gathering. Not as large as the last one, but still important. The owner moved through the house with purpose, giving instructions. At one point, he stopped near the maid and told her to be ready. Those words stayed with her. When the guests arrived, the tension returned. The maid served drinks, her movements careful. She could feel the piano calling her again. Eventually, the owner announced that there would be music. He looked at her. The room turned quiet. She walked to the piano with steady steps, though her heart was pounding. This time, there was no mocking tone, no laughter. She sat and played. The music was softer than before, gentler. It carried honesty, not defiance. The guests listened with respect. When she finished, the applause was calm but sincere. The owner nodded once. After the guests left, he spoke to her privately again. He said she had a choice now. She could remain hidden, or she could step forward. She asked what stepping forward would cost. He did not answer right away. He said attention always comes with a price. That night, she lay awake again, thinking of roads not taken, of chances lost, of dreams she had buried. She realized that staying invisible had protected her, but it had also kept her small. The next day, a letter arrived. It was addressed to the owner, but her name was mentioned inside. Someone had invited him to bring the pianist from his house to a public event. He showed her the letter. He asked her again. She took a long breath. She said yes. The decision scared her more than anything else she had ever done. But for the first time in a long while, fear was mixed with hope. The house felt different after that. The piano was no longer just decoration, and the maid was no longer just a shadow in the hallway. The day of the public event arrived sooner than she expected. The maid woke before dawn, her heart already beating fast. This time, it was not because of cleaning duties or fear of being scolded. It was something deeper. Today, she would be seen. The house was quiet as she dressed. Her uniform was replaced with simple, neat clothes chosen by someone else. Nothing fancy, nothing loud, just clean and respectful. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the person staring back. She looked nervous, but there was strength in her eyes. The drive to the venue felt long. The city outside the window moved quickly. Unaware of what this moment meant to her, she kept her hands folded in her lap, breathing slowly. When they arrived, the building felt alive. People moved with purpose. Voices echoed. Cameras were set up near the entrance. She stayed close, suddenly aware of how small she felt in such a big place. Inside, the piano waited on a wide stage. She stopped walking. For a moment, fear tried to pull her back. This was no longer a private room or a controlled space. This was open, honest, unforgiving. The owner noticed her hesitation. He did not push. He simply said it was her choice. That mattered more than she expected. She nodded and stepped forward. As people took their seats, a quiet tension filled the room. Many had come out of curiosity. Some had heard stories. Others just wanted something different. When she walked onto the stage, a soft murmur moved through the crowd. She felt every step, every breath. She sat at the piano. Her hands shook. She closed her eyes. She thought of the years she had spent cleaning, hiding, surviving. She thought of the nights she had cried quietly, believing that part of her life was over. Then she played. The first notes were gentle, not demanding attention, but asking for it. The music grew slowly, filling the space with warmth and truth. It carried pain, hope, loss, and strength. It was not perfect, it was human. The crowd listened. Some leaned forward, some wiped their eyes, others simply sat still, caught in the moment. She played until the room seemed to disappear. When the final note faded, silence followed. Then applause rose, strong and honest. She stood slowly, her chest tight, her eyes burning. She bowed her head, overwhelmed. After the event, people approached her, not to judge, but to thank her, to tell her how the music made them feel. She listened, still trying to understand that this was real. The owner watched from a distance. For the first time, he did not feel embarrassed or threatened. He felt something closer to respect. On the drive back, neither of them spoke much. Back at the house, things began to change. The maid was no longer called only for cleaning. She was asked about music, about what she needed, about what she wanted. She was offered lessons again, a chance to learn without fear. She accepted, not because of fame or money, but because she had finally remembered who she was. Weeks passed. The house felt warmer, not perfect, but different. She still worked, she still cleaned, but she also played. Sometimes for guests, sometimes for herself. One evening, as she finished practicing, she looked around the empty hall. The piano reflected soft light. The room felt peaceful. She realized something important. Her worth had never been hidden. It had only been ignored. She did not need approval to exist, but being seen had given her freedom. As she left the hall, she did not walk quietly. She walked with purpose. The girl who once tried to stay invisible was gone. In her place stood someone who had survived, endured, and finally allowed herself to be heard. And that changed everything.